One of the hardest questions to answer with comics is a very basic one. Where do I begin? With so many series, so many years of continuity, having a starting point can be difficult to find, and that's where this series comes in. Hi everyone out there, I'm Dan, aka the Comic Concierge, and each week I look at all the new comics coming out, pick out ongoing series starting new arcs, notable new series, and trade paperbacks and graphic novels being released. And then I finish things up by talking about the thing I'm most excited about, my pick of the week. So let's get things started by looking at all the ongoing series starting new arcs. The first ongoing series starting a new arc is Wolverine with issue number 11. And this Wolverine run actually has been a lot of fun. And it's been one of the X-Men titles that I feel like has been one of the easiest to get into. It's not really been tied to much of the other X-Men stuff. It has very much been its own thing. So it actually makes it a lot easier to follow. And if you maybe are not into the other X-Men stuff and are worried about this, know that you can jump in and pretty much understand everything without reading those titles. One concern I do have for this issue is that Adam Kubert is no longer on art duties, and he brought so much to this book thus far. His clever use of perspective, his amazing panel design, really, even when the script maybe wasn't working in all cylinders, his art was. So how will things go with him not there? I'm not sure. The other part that I'm not sure about is the fact that this is going to be dealing with Wolverine fighting vampires. And, Supernatural and Wolverine, I'm not sure about that. Although the X-Men have tangled with vampires a lot in the past, so it's not necessarily anything new. And apparently Omega Red is going to be tangling up with everything as well. And he was actually a big part of the book when it first began, and now he's coming back. So there may be ties to some of the first arcs, I'm not sure. But if you're a huge Wolverine fan, I know Wolverine, when I was a fan of comics in the 90s, he was everything. Not as much as he used to be, but still, I think if you have maybe passed on this run because there hasn't been a really strong Wolverine run, maybe give it a shot. Like I said, I think it's been one of the more consistent X-Men books since it's came out. And despite the fact that we are changing artists, at least the artist that we're getting, Scott Eaton, isn't another accomplished artist as well. So it may not be Kubert's art, but it still may be good. We shall see. Stay in the world of Marvel for our next issue, starting a new arc with Guardians of the Galaxy, issue number 13, or Legacy number 175, so it being that kind of anniversary issue. It's a bigger issue. It's also the start of a brand new Guardians of the Galaxy team. And I mean team inside the book. Al Ewing is still on writing duties, and this isn't a run that I've been kind of on and off with. I actually have missed the last number of issues. I enjoyed what I first read. It was just one of those things I felt behind on, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how good this is and how much it's being slept on. So I'm excited because this will be a good opportunity to kind of jump on board without having to read everything that happened before. And Guardians of the Galaxy is one of those groups that does have that ever-changing roster. So I'm excited to see what characters will be on this roster, because that can make or break how good a comic book is. Al Ewing is really proving himself as a writer with things like Immortal Hulk, but the Guardians of the Galaxy run, I feel like even when you put big names on it, even including like Donny Cates, for whatever reason, despite people loving the film, it hasn't garnered the attention you think it would. So maybe this shakeup is exactly what it needs in order to get people to pay attention to it, and maybe, checking it out, we'll see if it actually deserves that attention. We are still not leaving the world of Marvel with our next book, as Star Wars Bounty Hunters, issue number 11, also starts a new arc this week. And I will say my assumption is this will probably be a one-shot issue, because the next issue of Bounty Hunters gets into the Bounty Hunter summer event that's going to be a big part of all the Star Wars books. You're going to have this major crossover with all the Star Wars books, including this book, including Darth Vader, the main book. I think even some of the Dr. Alpha books as well. So be warned that if you enjoyed this, it might change things next issue. And if you're a person that doesn't like one-shots, maybe this might not be the thing for you. But as the cover suggests, which is a gorgeous cover, it's fantastic. It is a issue that focuses on Bosk, everyone's favorite lizard-based bounty hunter. So I'm excited to check this out, because I've actually not really been keeping up with this series. It's one of those where I kind of pick and choose my Star Wars stuff, and I've been mostly focusing on the High Republic stuff, but I am somewhat excited for this Bounty Hunters summer event. The fact that we're getting Steve McNiven doing Star Wars again is always a plus. I'm just hoping to get, a nice little one-shot to whet the appetite before the big event, the main meal, comes in upcoming weeks. Yes, there are comics outside of the world of Marvel that are also starting new arcs, and that's the case with Black Hammer Visionaries #3. And the Visionary series, it's an anthology series where each issue has a different creative team. The first issue was written by Pat Oswalt, the second issue by Jeff Johns. This issue is written by Chip Zdarsky, who I guess is contractually obligated to be on all anthology series because he's been on this, he's been on some of the other DC ones, he's been everywhere recently. He's also was on Silvercoin last week, so and he's also has a Daredevil comic coming out this week. So he's on that cavalcaded list of creators that seems to just be writing everything. Like him, Jeff Lemire, like Cullen Bunn, who we'll talk about later. They're just dominating like 90% of comics right now. And this is drawn by Johnny Christmas, who's an artist I have actually not had a lot of experience with. I think one of the most notable things he worked on was the Alien 3 comic for Dark Horse not too long ago. The last issue of this series I wasn't the biggest fan of. It just didn't work for me. It was this kind of slasher take on the Black Hammer universe, and it was, I don't know, it just didn't necessarily fit into the world of Black Hammer all that well. It didn't kind of go to the strength of Black Hammer and didn't do anything interesting with the idea of this series compared to the first issue, which kind of took the framework of Ghost World and threw it into that of Black Hammer. It was actually quite clever, which is kind of weird, where that was written by Pat Oswalt, who's not, a notorious comic book writer. I thought he did a much better job than Jeff Johns, who's this, veteran, well-acclaimed comic book writer. But yeah, things happen. Chip Zdarsky now is having his take on the world of Black Hammer, and maybe the fact that he's Canadian and Jeff Lemire's Canadian, he'll get the sensibilities a little bit more. Well, we shall see. But if you're a fan of the Black Hammer universe like myself, and you want more of it, this is your opportunity to get more comics focusing on that world. The last ongoing series starting a new arc that we will talk about is the Comic Book History of Animation #5. And I talked about this last time, and I'm going to talk about it as much as I can because I love this comic, and I feel like no one's talking about it because it's a non-fiction documentary comic that I guess doesn't necessarily hit the zeitgeist as much as something like a Batman book might. But this issue is focusing on manga, anime, and things like Hayao Miyazaki, as a cover indicates, like taking Hayao Miyazaki and making him look like Toro. And that's why I'm really excited. The last issue was all about Saturday morning cartoons, and it's just a well-researched, well-executed idea about telling the history of animation and how in the format of a comic book. And it's never dry. It's always interesting. They always find cool ways to display that on the page. And I would highly advise, if you're a fan of history, if you're a fan of animation, especially if you do love Hayao Miyazaki, if you're a huge anime fan and you want to learn more about it, because even if you're an expert or you feel like you know everything about each of these subjects, I think you'll probably find out that there's a lot of stuff in here that you didn't know, or at least appreciate the approach and how did they tell this story. Now, with this nearing its end, and if you haven't picked up this series thus far, it may make more sense to check out the trade, which will be coming out probably very shortly. And also, you can also check out the book they did previously, which was the Comic Book History of Comics, which is also quite good and done in the same type of format. All right, now that we talked about ongoing series starting new arcs, let's shift gears to look at new series debuting this week. The biggest new series coming this week comes from the world of DC, and of course, it's Batman. It's Batman the Detective #1, and this is written by Tom Taylor, who I think set the world on fire with his recent issue of Nightwing, and drawn by Andy Kubert. So a big week for the Kuberts, I guess, in the sense of how one isn't doing a book and Andy is doing this book. So that is quite the creative team, which has me excited. Now, I have read some of Tom Taylor's. He worked on things like Detective Comics in the past, so this isn't the first time he's tackled Batman. Of course, he's written things like Deceased as well. It was mainly Damian as Batman. This is probably one of the bigger books. Anytime you get an opportunity to have your own Batman series, clearly that means that DC trusts you, and I think Tom Taylor has certainly earned that trust. With you just look at the sales numbers of something like Deceased and just the critical acclaim of something very recent like the Nightwing book. So what will this do? What different take will he have on Batman? I'm not sure, but at least we get a different location as this is taking place in Europe. And I know a lot of people who loved the early 70s and 80s runs where you had a Batman that did go all across the country and the world. He wasn't just centered in Gotham, which hasn't really happened in quite some time, maybe since the Batman Inc. run, where lately it's just been Batman in Gotham and people taking over Gotham. And as a person who's not really loving the current Batman run all that much compared to most people, I'm excited to get a Batman book that, is new and is going to be a limited series, so I don't have to worry about continuing with it, and it won't have to worry about being tied to other major events. It can just be its own thing. It does seem to take place in normal continuity. This is not a Black Label book. This is our normal DC continuity book, although I doubt it will deal with a lot of the other ongoing stuff that has happening in DC. So I'm excited for it. Like I said, being a Tom Taylor fan, I've loved a lot of his work that he's been doing lately, like most people. And Andy Kubert on art, Andy Kubert doing Batman, that has me excited. And also Batman in Europe, that's kind of cool too. So I know there's probably a lot of people out there that are just sick of Batman books because, we do get a lot of them. That is DC's bread and butter. But like I said, if I look at just the ingredients to this, even at the fact that it is like the 80th Batman book that come out in the last 4 weeks, it can still be really good. And let's hope it is. Argue with me that this is actually the biggest number one, because when you look at the creators that are involved, along with the universes and titles that are combining into one book, it is pretty impressive, because you have Locke and Key in the Sandman universe, number one, Hell and Gone. And this is written by Joe Hill and Neil Gaiman. And those are two names. I mean, obviously Neil Gaiman is like a god among really many people. He's admired for a lot of the work he's done with comics. He's done with everything in the Sandman universe. Is the pinnacle of comic book making for a lot of people when it was at its height. Maybe not as much now, who knows, but anytime you put Neil Gaiman's name on something, it's going to garner a lot of interest. And Joe Hill as well. I mean, Hill House books last year, I think, proved themselves, and there was a lot of great titles out of that. And being the son of Stephen King brings with it, I think, a lot of pressure. The fact that he's carved his own niche in the comic book world, I think, shows that he's just not someone that is getting to where he is because of who he's connected to. He has a lot of talent, and the fact that Locke and Key is also a Netflix series, and the Sandman universe is becoming one. And rarely do we get these crossovers anymore. And usually when they happen, it's we're not getting the Marvel and DC. We're getting like the DC and IDW universes. So how is this going to work out? I really don't know. Doing these crossovers can be just an editorial nightmare, because you have all these different ramifications that can go into it and what people want. So it can be difficult to make a good book, but you would think the fact that these are creators that do have a good sense of creative control over their properties, that they would maybe not have the parameters that are faced with other characters when, like, you have Superman showing up in the Marvel universe or something like that. So if you're a fan of either of these properties, go ahead and give it a try. And I'm interested in checking it out. Like, I've read a little bit of Locke and Key and a little bit of Sandman, so I'm a little hesitant to jump in, because it does seem like I might get lost right away. I don't know how welcoming this will be to new readers of both universes, if it's going to have some expectations that what happened in the past books. I'm not sure. I did really like the Locke and Key miniseries that happened last year, which was like taking place during World War I. With both of these universes, there's so many different opportunities and how they can connect and how they can work their brand. These aren't just a few characters that can cross over. You're talking about literally universes and concepts. But having unlimited possibilities can also be a bad thing, because then you just have too many choices and you can get lost in it. So there's a lot of things that can happen with this. So I'm excited to see it, just to see how well they pull it off, because it can be something that'll be amazing. It could be a dud. It could be convoluted. There's a lot of different possibilities when it comes to how well this book is going to work out. And I'm interested to see, who's out there that's interested in this. This is going to bring maybe a lot of people that aren't typically reading comics, because, this is seeing something that has really not been done before. This is a big week for crossovers, as we also are getting the World's Greatest Detective teaming up with the Cape Crusader and the Batman and Scooby-Doo number one. And this seems like it could be a lot of fun. Batman and Scooby-Doo world have crossed over a lot in the past. There's been cartoons of it. There's been some comics. There was the Scooby-Doo team-up series not too long ago, which was quite good, actually. It was much better than you would think it would be. And the Scooby-Doo comics have come and gone. And there was that random, like, the World Scooby-Doo comic that came out at the time of, like, the Flintstones, which was, a bit weird, but this seems to be more standard, kid-friendly Batman and kid-friendly Scooby-Doo coming together. And there's not a lot of kid-friendly comics that are out there, especially from DC on this type of format, on a monthly issue format. So if you do have kids and you want to get them opportunity to read something, although I don't know how popular Scooby-Doo is right now with kids. My kid actually does like Scooby-Doo. He's watched some of the cartoons on Netflix, but I don't think he's necessarily at the same level as he once was. I was never a huge Scooby-Doo fan as a kid. I'm sorry. I'm sure a lot of people are angry by that. It just was one of those cartoons I never really watched. However, as you know, my son is a big fan of Scooby-Doo, maybe I will check this out and see if it's something he would enjoy, because that might blow his mind, seeing the first time that you're getting a crossover like this of that Scooby-Doo that is teaming up with that Batman and man, that can blow some young minds. A new number one for Marvel this week is Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk, number one. That's a lot of Hawks in one title, and this is a celebration of the 30 years of Darkhawk. And when I think about this character, to me, he was just everything 90s, from his design, from the kind of the way he was created. He was meant to be this big new character in a time when speculation was huge. So everyone thought, oh, this is going to be the new Wolverine, even has claws, and it never quite got there. Although there was some attempts to bring the character back. I remember with like Annihilation and things like that. They revamped the idea of Darkhawk and things like that. And this is a celebration, so there's a combination of short stories where you have the creators coming back. You have Dan Abnett, like I mentioned, to help redefine the character. Also Kyle Higgins, who will be working on the new series that'll be coming out shortly as well. Yes, we are getting another Darkhawk series after this. So I guess if you're a huge fan of the characters, this may be something that you want to check out if you're interested in seeing what this new series will be. So just to be warned, this isn't the start of a new series. This is kind of a combination of both. And we saw DC do this a lot with their anniversary issues, where they would have a lot of short stories, and then at the last issue was often whoever the new creative team would be on it, and they had to write their short story that would lead into the new series that's coming out, and they're taking that format with this issue. So I'm guessing if you're not a huge fan of the character, that may not be something you want to pick up. I don't think this is going to forge a lot of new fans. Maybe it will. Maybe the fact that it is kind of having a combination of old and new could lead to something good. I'm not sure. I'm not a huge fan of the character personally, so I'll wait and see. I'm interested if you are. Are you excited for it? Or are you excited to see more Darkhawk in the world of Marvel Universe? Because it's been some time since we've seen him, and I think there's a reason for that, but maybe this could prove me wrong. A new number one from Image this week is Home number one, and this is centers on a mother and a son who are traveling to the United States seeking asylum, and as they're going there, the son is dealing with a lot of trauma and anxiety about what's happening as they get separated, and where that trauma is coming, where that feeling is coming from. It isn't just the fact that they're dealing with this journey, but he's actually getting superpowers. So it's taking a really huge hot button topic, especially right now, that actually has been really much in the news as of late, and placing it within Image and placing a superhero twist on the idea. Personally, I was actually excited about this before the supernatural twist was added at the end, or the aspect of having superpowers. I'm not against that, but I think just having a comic book about this issue, about this topic, coming out monthly would be great, even without having superpowers being thrown into it. Now, that does have me interested, because this is a type of superhero story that we really haven't seen before, and one that I think probably should be told in some way. So I'm glad that Image is putting this out. This is from a creative team that's relatively new to comics. So again, myself, I don't have a lot of experience with them, but it does seem like Image has had a lot of faith in this book, because they have been, I think, promoting it a lot. I've seen a lot of images in the back of the books, and social media wise, they've been really pushing this. So I'll be checking it out, because I really want to know, like, how exactly are they going to make this idea work. And it's probably going to be one of the books that's clearly talked about, because when you're talking about such a vital topic, it's going to garner attention, as it should, and I'm hoping they can take that attention to say something rather important about the issue. Coming from the world of Behemoth Comics, you have You Promised Me Darkness number one, and this is another comic that deals with superhero people, but it has a different twist on how people get their superpowers. It's based on Halley's Comet that comes every 75 years, and every year it comes, more people gain powers because of it. So I think that it's a clever idea of, like, how do you get people to have superpowers? And we've seen so many different ideas, from, like, they're just mutants, they have them, to, of course, they get dropped in radioactive acid or whatever, to this where it's based upon Halley's Comet. So that's kind of cool that they're finding a new ways to create superheroes. And the big conflict here is that you have a a villain who actually seeks out those that have superpowers and takes their energy and becomes stronger each time. Like, I guess, like Highlander in a way. There can only be one. We shall see. But I feel like I'm seeing a lot more from Behemoth Comics. I don't know. It's just because I'm doing this series, so I'm seeing more from them, or if they're getting more attention because they're having more success. Either way, and Behemoth Comics tend to have a pretty strong horror vibe. So if you are a horror fan and you want a new book to check out, you may want to check this one out. One of the new series I'm really excited about is Canto, City of Giants #1. And this is, again, a #1 that's not really a #1 in the sense of there's been past Canto series. This is the third series. There was also a one-shot. I will say, I think most of the Canto books have been pretty welcoming to new readers, even if you haven't read the ones before. I would highly advise you checking out, especially if you love adventure tales, if you love fantasy tales. Canto is grown into one of my favorite characters over the last few years because of this book and his adventures. He's just one of those characters that you can really easily get behind. And one thing I just find that is really compelling about this series is that it's filled of characters that like each other, which seems a bit weird to talk about as a compliment, but I feel like a lot of comics now, and especially superhero comics, it's just all this arguing and people that hate each other, that always conflict with one another. And seeing a book of just clearly there's conflict, clearly there's drama, but just on their sense of they actually really deeply care for each other, and that's really where the most of the drama comes from. Plus, obviously, you have everything else going on with all this fantasy world filled of monsters, and now, of course, giants, and now the fact that you have Canto, who himself is not the biggest person in the world, or I guess not person, but he's yay big, and now he's in the land of giants. Like, that to me, just right there, only in the premise, you have a lot of stakes, because, man, that guy could get stepped on and things would not go really well. It's also, I think, a pretty good family-friendly book as well, which I know sometimes could be a moniker that scares people, because family-friendly usually means generic or corny, and it's not that. It's into something like Wizard of Oz, where I think anyone who watches it or reads it will be able to enjoy it and take something out of it, no matter if you're 5 years old or if you're 50 years old. Fortunately, I'm much closer to the latter than the former, but what you're going to do. On the bright side, reading a book like Canto is one of those that'll keep you forever young. So, joking aside, it's been a really strong book, really consistent book. And I think, like, if that type of genre is something you enjoy, highly advise checking it out. Checking out the trades that are currently out for the first series, as well as the second series that just ended a few months ago. It's been quite a journey, and I'm glad we're getting more Canto coming out this week. Also coming out from Image Comics is Jules Verne's Lighthouse #1, and this comes from the creative teams that gave us The Marked and Sonata, which are two series that I thought had promise but never quite got there. I just never also loved the look of Sonata. I give it credit for trying different things with the medium and the attempt to kind of use photorealism as part of the page was a good idea. It just never completely worked for me. So I guess that makes me a little hesitant to pick up this book. The premise is about this lighthouse, but not a lighthouse that you'll see next to the sea, a lighthouse in space. And it's a supercomputer that helps ships travel across the galaxy in these wormholes so they're not, crashing into one another. And it's manned by a few humans, an alien, and a nanny bot. And they're able to, peacefully help ships across the galaxy. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, if you want a comic that has drama, there are pirates that are attempting to change that and bring havoc and chaos to the galaxy by taking over this lighthouse. So I do give them a lot of credit for having a concept that is pretty bold. There's a lot going on with this idea and a lot of possibilities as well, and actually is kind of clever when you think about it. It's like, yeah, I guess if you're traveling across the galaxy, it would make sense to have something that could help guide people. And what happens if that thing goes away? That's amazing. What could happen there? So despite the fact that maybe I didn't love their past stuff as much as some other people, I'll give it a shot and see how it goes. I mentioned Colin Bunn previously because he also has a new #1 coming out this week with The Phantom in the Scan #1, where he teams up with a previous creative partner, Scott Torres. They worked on the series Cold Spots not too long ago. And oddly enough, this is another book that deals with people getting superpowers because of a comet. A comet hits Earth and it let people get psychic abilities. Now that one of the people with psychic abilities is seeing that other individuals that also gain those abilities are being killed. The other thing with the psychic ability is the fact that when he uses it, it does hurt him and bring him to his end ever so closer. So he's trying to then team up with the people that are left to figure out what's going on and to save their lives. So I don't know what's in the water where people are like, what can give people superpowers? Comments. And so clearly this isn't a case of serendipity where you have two comics that are coming out where people getting powers due to an object falling from space. I guess it's not that super uncommon in the world of comics, so maybe it makes sense. And again, it does deal with where those people are being hunted down. But I guess the different element for this one, again, is that when he uses those psychic abilities, he also loses them. So again, I don't think this is a case of people copying off one another, considering how long comics are made. It's just something that occurs, and maybe there'll be a nice little contest. And it's always funny when that happens. You see it a lot with movies, of course, when you had Tombstone and Wyatt Earp coming out recently, and now we have the comics that are coming out this week. So what does that mean? Which one's going to be the Wyatt Earp? Which one's going to be the Tombstone? Hopefully both of these end up being Tombstone. Not to disparage Wyatt Earp. It's just, not as good as Tombstone, and no one really talks about it because it's not as good as Tombstone. But there you go. So if you like comics that deal with people getting with superpowers, do the things that falling with space, this is going to be your best week ever, I think. The last number one comes from Dark Horse, and it's Jenny Zero, number one. And this is another kaiju story. Yes, this has nothing to do with comets, but we do get another book about giant monsters. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately. I don't know, people just saw a lot of the King Kong and Godzilla trailers, and it's like, I want to make a comic about big monsters fighting. Who knows? But what's different about this is that Jenny is this person that was a kaiju killer in the past, but she's no longer in that role. She's kind of washed out, and the kaiju basically have left. And she's become kind of an alcoholic, and she's been dealing with a lot of problems. Unfortunately, it seems that the kaiju has returned, and she has to decide, can she sober up? Can she help fix those problems and bring the fight to them once again? And part of me does wonder is, like, can you approach a serious topic like that, like alcoholism, like addiction, through the world of kaiju? And my thought is probably. I mean, you saw superhero books deal with alcoholism. I mean, you had a man in a metal suit deal with alcoholism as Iron Man, and that's one of the more notable runs in that series. Just because maybe the concept is something that is a bit cartoonish doesn't necessarily mean you can deal with some serious issues. This is a creative team I don't have a lot of experience with. I haven't read their work in the past, so I can't speak to that. But this is the type of book, like I mentioned, that could potentially put them on my radar as something some people I need to check out, which I'm always looking forward to. And if you are a kaiju fan, there have been a lot of books in the last few weeks to check out, and maybe this will be one of the best ones. Who knows? But if you're interested and you want to check it out, it'll be coming out this week. We talked about ongoing series starting new arcs, new number ones. We're going to shift over to the world of graphic novels and trade paperbacks. The first graphic novel we're talking about is Monsters. This is published by Fantagraphics, and it's written and drawn by Barry Windsor Smith. And this is noted to be a project he's been working on for 35 years, which is incredible to think about. Barry Windsor Smith is a very known name. He's very accomplished in the world of comics, and this is set to be one of his best works, which is a lot of pressure to put on a graphic novel. So we shall see. It's about a story where a person in 1964 joins the army and quickly is put into experiments that were actually continuing from the World War II, taking things that the Nazis were doing and now using it on American soldiers and dealing with those repercussions. It's set to be very heartfelt and very detailed, and a story that, like I mentioned, Barry Windsor Smith has put a lot of thought and ideas into over these 3 past decades. So I'm really excited to check this out because if you're going to put a lot of pressure on yourself, Fantagraphics doesn't do that very often. They're not one to speak in hyperbole. So if they're having this much faith in this book, and considering Barry Windsor Smith is one that has done phenomenal work in the past, this could be one of the best comics of the years thus far. It could be one of the books that you see as nominated for Eisner. So it may end up being the best book I read this week if I can get a chance and check it out. It actually was at bookstores earlier in the year, but now it's finally coming to your local comic book stores this week. Also coming out this week is Batman Death in the Family Deluxe Edition. And I bring this up, obviously Batman Death in the Family is a book that has been out a lot in different editions and things like that. But if you're looking to read one of the most iconic Batman stories of all time, now you can in a new edition. I know recently they put out the animated film that was gave you options of what you wanted to do to try to then give you a different idea, a different experience. Because when this book first came out, they had people vote if a certain person should die or live, and then not to ruin it for someone who didn't read it, but you'll get the idea. But yes, it's coming out in a brand new edition. So if you've never owned it, or you wanted to own it again, or if it's one of your favorite comics that you just keep buying no matter what different format it's in, you'll see a new edition coming out this week at your local comic book store. Another new printing coming out this week is Criminal Volume 1 and Volume 2. Both are coming out this week. And this is Criminal combining a lot of early Criminal stories. And it's kind of confusing when you say Criminal Volume 1 because there have been different examples of Criminal. You had, obviously the recent Image, you've had Icon, but this covers the first 3 major story arcs. It's over 400 pages, this first deluxe volume. So you're getting a lot of comic there, and it is set at cover price at $50. So if you're a huge Ed Brubaker fan and Sean Phillips fan like I am, and a lot of these examples are actually kind of hard to track down because a lot of the original trade paperbacks are not sold anymore, and the issues themselves are hard to find. So if you enjoyed the recent Criminal series that was done by Image and you want to read more Criminal, know that you can check these books out. And some of the stories that recently came out do tie into these. It's the one cool thing about Criminal is that you can kind of go in and go out of it. Some of the characters pop up again. You don't necessarily need to read all of it to understand it, but the one consistent is that it's always really good, at least most of the time. One of the trade paperbacks I'm really excited about coming out this week is Wicked Things, and this is a continuation of John Allison's and Mark Soren's Giant Days series. And Giant Days was a fantastic comic that ran about 50 issues or so, which are about these people growing up and through their college years, and it recently ended. And Wicked Things was a spin-off of that series that focused on the character of Charlotte as her time as a detective. And this is just a really fun book. Mark Soren's cartooning is amazing. It's not a book I think that's going to work for necessarily everyone, but if you enjoyed Giant Days, it's again a more human level drama. It's very funny. It's very cartoonish in a way. There's actually there's not really enough comics like this in the comic book world. I was really sad when Giant Days ended, but Wicked Things came out and I was excited to get it. So I think John Allison has a very particular sense of humor, and if it clicks with you, it will really click with you. Check this out and you really like it. You don't have to read Giant Days to get this. It only deals with Charlotte's character. It doesn't necessarily tie into the other characters, so don't feel like you need to read all those issues to follow this. But if you do read it, you do like it, highly advise going and checking out Giant Days either in trade or digitally. To me, it was one of the best comics of the last decade or so, and how consistent it was and how it was telling a story that really no one else was in the world of comics to that level. All right, we talked about trade paperbacks, we talked about graphic novels, we talked about new number ones, we talked about ongoing series starting new arcs, and now we're going to talk about the thing I'm most excited about, my pick of the week. This was a week where it was hard to choose the book for number one because there's a lot of things that were very close to this. Batman, Detective, Monsters, Wicked Things all could kind of fit in here. But as I put everything together and I kind of measured everything out, the book I ended up choosing was Spider-Man Spider's Shadow, number one. And why this book? Well, number one is written by Chip Zdarsky, who's a writer that's been really clicking with me as of late. Loving his Daredevil book, and we get another issue of that this week as well. And it's also doing something that I love, which are the what if stories. I've always loved the what if books. And you're wondering, well, it doesn't say what if. What do you mean it's a what if story? It's a different approach to the what if stories. Typically, the what if books were one issues. It was like, what if the Fantastic Four never were formed? What would be the issue? And by the end of it, you would get that story. And then the next what if would be, what if the Punisher became Venom? So by the end of each issue, it was over. You never went on to the next issue. This is having a different approach where it's a what if story, but it's going to be a few issues long. Now, I know some people are being like, oh, great, more decompressed storytelling. That's what modern comics needs more often. And I kind of could see that, but I have a lot of faith. Like, my thought was, the first thing I thought about actually was Spider-Man Life Story that came out last year or 2 years ago. Time doesn't matter anymore. But I love that book. And I guess you could kind of fit that into the idea of a what if as well, because it would be like, what if time passed normally in the Marvel universe? And we're getting a Fantastic Four life story coming out very soon, and I'm really excited about that. It's going to be written by Mark Russell, so I'm just going to say that's probably going to be my most anticipated book, whatever week that comes out. But for this one, again, it's Spider-Man, and I'm a pretty big Spider-Man fan. He's not my favorite character of all time, but I've read a lot of Spider-Man stuff. I grew up on the 90s series, and this is about what if Spider-Man became Venom. And part of me is like, I don't need any more symbiote stuff because we just had all the King in Black things, and like, I don't know, but the fact is it's its own thing. It's on its own universe. It's not going to be dealing with anything else. It's not going to be dealing with Null. At least I don't think it will be. And I love the idea of being able to give creators like the freedom to do what they want inside the Marvel universe. Like, I really miss Marvel Knights and like Marvel Max, where you could tell like a bit more mature stories in the Marvel universe, and you didn't have to worry about continuity. Those have kind of gone away. So this will be like the closest thing we get to it. So that's why it's my most anticipated. They're just a little bit, it's combining a lot of things that I like and a lot of things I miss into one book. Will be good. Who knows? Sometimes putting expectations on a book like this is a kiss of death, and it won't end up being very good. I doubt it will be bad, and maybe it won't be great, but that's the book I went with this week. Like I said, there's a lot of different comics that could fit into this most anticipated book this week. There's a lot that I'm excited for. I feel like I'm always excited for books each week. That's the wonderful thing about comic books, is that each week we have so many books to choose from that all have potential to be good. Sometimes it ends up working out, sometimes it doesn't. But anyways, I will end this video. So let me know what you're excited about. What are you most anticipating? What are some books that maybe I brought to your attention that now you're excited for? Always love hearing about those stories as well. Just thank you for checking out the video. I really do appreciate it. Just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.